So I've got a trivia question for you to kick things off. Who is the only person in history to win a United States presidential election without a single solitary dissenting electoral vote? I mean, just think about that for a second. In a political system literally designed around debate, division, and competing factions, who could possibly unite every single elector behind them?
If you guessed George Washington, you hit the nail right on the head. The magic number is 69. Washington locked down all 69 available electoral votes in a stunning, completely unopposed victory. Seriously, it's a feat that has never, ever been repeated in American history. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we are diving into the origin story of America's very first presidential election, the historic election of 1788 to 1789. We're going to unpack exactly how this totally unprecedented election worked, who the major players were, and why it laid the groundwork for the whole shebang that followed. We'll be breaking this down into 5 quick parts. A nation needs a leader, the first electoral college, drafting George Washington, the unanimous verdict, and finally, setting the precedent. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A nation needs a leader, 1788. Okay, picture the scene. It's 1788, and it's an incredibly fragile time for the new country. The Revolutionary War is in the rearview mirror, sure, but the actual structure of the nation, totally up in the air. By June of that year, the U.S. Constitution was officially ratified. That was huge, because it replaced the notoriously weak Articles of Confederation. Under those old rules, the government just didn't have any real central authority. But this new Constitution, it established a robust federal government and a brand new executive office, the President of the United States. So they had the rulebook, but now they desperately needed a leader to actually execute it.
Moving into Section 2, the first electoral college and its voting rules. Now, picking this new leader was not as simple as just, asking everyone to cast a ballot. What's really fascinating is how wildly different those original rules were compared to how we do things today. Under Article 2, Section 1 of the Constitution, states appointed electors based on their total number of senators and representatives. But here's the crazy part. Each elector wrote down 2 names on their ballot. There was absolutely no distinction between president and vice president. Whoever got the most votes, assuming it was a majority, became president, and the runner-up got the vice presidency as a consolation prize. The framers actually designed it this way on purpose to avoid a direct popular vote for the executive branch. But pulling this off wasn't exactly smooth sailing. When public voting rolled around between December 1788 and January 1789, out of the original 13 states, only 10 actually got their act together to participate. So what happened to the others? Well, New York was totally bogged down in internal political drama and just missed the deadline to send their electors. In North Carolina and Rhode Island, they hadn't even ratified the Constitution yet. So because of those missing states, only 72 electors were appointed for the entire country. Which brings us to Section 3, drafting George Washington, the ultimate frontrunner. So with those 10 participating states and 72 electors gearing up to cast their double votes, everyone's attention naturally turned to the one guy meant for the job. George Washington was the absolute, undeniable frontrunner. I mean, besides maybe Benjamin Franklin, Washington was practically the most famous person in America. He had flawlessly led the Continental Army, he presided over the convention that actually drafted the Constitution, plus he was from Virginia, which was the biggest state in the Union back then. His leadership was so universally respected that honestly, nobody else was even seriously considered for the top spot. But here's the catch. Washington actually had to be convinced to take the job. He was happily retired, chilling at Mount Vernon, and totally done with public life. His peers, though, knew the new government would completely flop without his credibility backing it up. So Alexander Hamilton steps in. He writes this incredibly passionate letter to Washington, basically saying, look, the point of light in which you stand at home and abroad will make an infinite difference in the respectability in which the government will begin its operations. Hamilton wasn't mincing words. He made it crystal clear that the nation didn't just want Washington, they absolutely needed him to legitimize this whole constitutional experiment. Section 4, the unanimous verdict, in February 1789. Obviously, Hamilton's powers of persuasion worked, because on February 4, the electors officially met to vote, and you've got to look at these numbers. Out of the 72 appointed electors, 69 actually showed up and cast their ballots. And guess what? George Washington's name was written on every single one of them, a 100% unanimous victory. Now remember that weird rule where everyone casts the second vote? Because of that, the remaining votes were scattered all over the place. John Adams snagged 34 of them, making him the runner-up and our first vice president. The rest trickled down to folks like John Jay with 9, John Rutledge with 6,
and even the anti-federalist candidate George Clinton, who walked away with 3.
Let's check out the timeline here because this really turned into one giant national party. The electoral vote was officially certified on April 6. Congress lets Washington know, and on April 16, he reluctantly but dutifully leaves Mount Vernon. His trip up to New York City, which was the nation's capital at the time, was basically a massive victory lap. We're talking overwhelming celebrations, parades, the whole 9 yards in literally every town and village he passed through along the way.
The whole thing reached its climax on April 30th, 1789, at Federal Hall in New York City. Washington steps out, and Robert Livingston, the Chancellor of New York, administers the oath of office. Washington swears to faithfully execute the office and preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, with his hand resting on what we now famously call the George Washington Inaugural Bible. And right when he finished, Chancellor Livingston turns to the massive crowd and shouts, "Long live George Washington, President of the United States."
Finally, Section 5, setting the precedent and creating a lasting framework.
For anyone studying history, or especially APUSH, right here is your golden takeaway. The election of 1789 wasn't just some historical formality. It was the ultimate proof of concept for the United States. We were transitioning from the disastrous Articles of Confederation to this brand new Constitution. By willingly stepping into this new system, Washington and the nation set the absolute gold standard, the peaceful transfer of power. It took all those theoretical, untested rules on a piece of paper and transformed them into a stable, functioning federal government. The system actually survived its very first, most critical test.
I want to leave you with this thought to mull over. Just think about the sheer restraint it took to hold an election instead of, just crowning a king after winning a massive war. How did George Washington's unanimous, incredibly peaceful acceptance of power shape our expectations for literally every single American election that followed? Because that framework they built in 1789, it is the exact same foundation the Electoral College rests on today. Thank you so much for hanging out with me in this explainer. Keep asking those big questions, and I'll catch you in the next one.